Hi everyone, my name's Jason Enright. I'm a LA Forward volunteer. I live in North Hollywood, which is Council District 2. And just a little background on myself. I started volunteering with LA Forward a couple years ago, and 2 years ago, Godfrey held an event at a park near me, and a bunch of people were talking about issues in the city that mattered to them. And something that kept coming up is, who do you call if you see someone on the streets who's maybe homeless, maybe not homeless, but they're suffering some sort of a mental health crisis, and they need help. Maybe they're intoxicated, maybe they aren't fully dressed, maybe they're just having a really rough time, um, or causing a disturbance in the street or something. And you want to give them help, but you don't necessarily want to call LAPD. What can you do? And at the time, that was just a really big question. I had no idea how to answer that question. I had no idea who I would call. So we started digging into it, and we learned that there are cities around the nation that have specialized teams of mental health responders, who can answer those kinds of questions. But our city didn't really have those. And so we all started organizing together to do that. And that year, we won $16 million in the budget for the city to create a pilot program called the Unarmed Model of Crisis Response. And since then, we've been advocating to try to get that pilot program expanded citywide. It started in three areas, it's moved to 6 areas. It's been growing, growing, growing. So we're going to go through tonight and talk a little bit more about the future of that pilot program, but also a really interesting opportunity that's come up around the city creating a Department of Community Safety that would include programs like that, but also other programs that are safety based, but aren't necessarily police or fire based. So we'll get into that a little later. Um, so just to go over things real quick, we have a pretty easy agenda tonight. We're going to talk a little bit first here about the Unarmed Model of Crisis Response Program, some of the most recent updates, and then we're going to do a little Q&A if people have questions about that or about where things are going. One of the reasons we're doing this tonight is that we're coming up to like a point where we have to decide where to go next with our campaign, and we're going to release a little survey for people to talk about where this group is going to go next. So at the end of my section in the beginning here, we're going to have some questions for you to think about and ruminate on, and then at the end of the second segment, which is going to be run by another volunteer, we'll have a few more questions on that survey you can answer. So the first part of the night is UMCR. Second part of the night is Department of Community Safety. And finally, at the end, we'll talk about next steps. And this is a special sort of teach-in meeting, but we also do this every Monday at 7 p.m. This group meets to talk about our ongoing campaign around community safety and unarmed models of crisis response. So first, I always like to ground us um, in what we mean as a group when we talk about unarmed crisis response, because there are different definitions, there are even different terms out there. Some people in the city or the county will use the term alternative crisis response because they're not always talking about truly unarmed services. There's like something called a co-response model where they send out police officers paired with mental health experts. When we talk about this work, we are truly interested in unarmed police alternatives. And we're very focused on who residents can call when they're experiencing or they witness someone experiencing immediate crisis, what unarmed people or services will show up to answer that call, and what is the quality of those services. Basically, what happens as part of that call. Um, our hope is that the people are connected to further services, and that also it's a voluntary thing. There's a term in mental health called a 5150, which is when someone is involuntarily put into mental health care for like 48 hours, or it's either 48 or 72. I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But
It's 72, but if the
72.
psychiatrist says that the person can go home earlier, then mine was 50.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Emily. But yeah, so we're very concerned into what the quality of these services are, that the people in crisis are getting good quality services and being connected to future care as well. Um, Tonight we're going to be talking mostly about city programs. You might hear the term UMCR, which means Unarmed Model of Crisis Response. You might hear the term Circle, which is another alternative to policing that involves helping homeless individuals. But there's also county programs like 988 and the crisis intervention teams. Metro has some programs they're working on, and there are also federal and state things that sometimes are involved with this. But for tonight, we're mostly focusing on what's going on in the city of LA. Just to give you a little bit of a window into what we've done so far over the last couple of years. 2 years ago in July, at the end of the budget season, we won $16 million in unappropriated budget funds to launch a pilot program. If you ever hear us use the term unappropriated budget funds, that means like they don't know exactly what program or what thing the city's going to use that for, so they put it in a budget called unappropriated so that they can use it as needed, rather than it going to a specific department or a specific program at the time. Because at the time we won this, the pilot program hadn't even been created yet. That's why it was put in the unappropriated budget. Um, then last year in March 2024, the Unarmed Model Crisis Response Program actually launched, like with drivers and people out on the streets working it. It initially operated in three police divisions out of 21. Um, in September 2024, because it had rapidly become successful, they had a lot of good statistics out of it. They went to city council and asked to expand the program to six additional police precincts. Um, and then in July of 2024, I have these a little out of order, sorry. We asked for more money for the program, but we didn't win the money that year. And so they just rolled over the remaining funds in the unappropriated balance. However, this year, we were really happy to find out after we advocated for it a lot that UMCR is being budgeted 9.4 million and given its own budget line. So hopefully that will roll over every year without us having to fight for it quite so hard. And then we just learned last week that there's a new budget memo on the potential for further expansion for UMCR. We're going to go over what that means in just a moment, but essentially, there's a budget number given for how much it would take to expand three additional divisions. There's also a budget number given for how much it would cost to run the program citywide. So before we get too much into UMCR, let's just give a quick idea of what it is. So uh, unlike other programs like Circle or like 988, you don't have to specifically call and ask for UMCR. But if you call 911 or you call Ask LAPD and you report something, the person called the PSR, the 911 operator, is going to go through a series of questions and sort of triage the call. And if they determine that this fits the criteria of a UMCR call, then they'll send UMCR. So, what kinds of calls are these? Mental health related, suicidal threats, substance abuse, behavioral distress, conflict resolution, and welfare checks. The majority of UNCR calls are what they call a disturbance. Basically, someone calling and saying like someone's standing at the corner shouting. Um, they seem to be hard to reason with. Can you come help them? There's also quite a few for some sort of intoxication, or for people who may not be fully clothed, things like that. What's interesting with UMCR is instead of a police car being sent out, they send out a little van with a behavioral health specialist and a community worker or therapist or crisis interventionist. They're there to sort of talk the person down, um, de-escalate the situation, and then connect them to further services. They might offer to take them to like a health access center. They might offer to schedule them like an appointment for a follow up. But it's all voluntary. No one's forced to go anywhere or forced to leave the scene. They operate 24/7. The services are currently contracted out to three different providers in the city. their Penny Lane, Exodus Recovery, and the Alcott Center. This whole program is overseen by an office in the city called the City Administrative Office, which sort of is a general. They oversee a lot of budget related things and stuff like that in the city. But this is important because it's not in like a department like police or fire, or like we're going to talk in the future, a Department of Community Safety. And we want to eventually try to move this program out of the city administrative office and get it into sort of a more permanent home. There's going to be an upcoming evaluation done through a partnership with Claremont Graduate University, that's going to evaluate how well the program's working by like an independent third party. And this program is designed not to overlap with the Circle homelessness program in terms of both service area and call type, so that it can be studied separately. The pilot launched in January 2024, so the data from the first year hasn't come out just yet. Or sorry, it's actually March 2024. Just so you can see here, the orange areas are the initial service areas the UMCR was in, and then the yellow areas are where it's expanded to. So there's the Alcott provider covers the Wilshire division and Olympic division. The Penny Lane provider covers Devonshire and West Valley, up in the valley up here. And then Exodus covers the Southeast division and the West LA division. So there was recently a budget report last Thursday that talked about the potential to expand the UMCR program. And basically, so for the current year, they're budgeting 9.4 million, which will fund the program through the end of June 2026. And they talked about the idea of expanding to 3 new police divisions, which would cost the city an additional 4.5 million. There was the 3 new divisions would be the Mission Division, which is up in the valley, the Harbor Division, and the Rampart Division. And then they also talked about what it would potentially cost to go citywide with this program. So in addition to the 9.4 million, going citywide would cost an additional 27 million, for a total of about 37.5 million when all is said and done. And that would be yearly what this program would cost, which is still a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what the LAPD or the fire department or things like that cost. If you want to see, this is what the new map would look like after expansion. So you see we're growing out next to areas we are already covering. Now let's talk, that's the proposal, but let's talk a little bit about the reality of our current budget. Just so you know, our city's facing a big budget deficit. I initially heard it was 1 billion. They've said that now, after they've made some changes and moved some stuff around, it could be lower, but the number that was floating around is anywhere between, I believe, like 300 million to $1 billion deficit. To balance the budget, the mayor is proposing cutting 1,600 city jobs. Council, in their current budget deliberations, their goal is to try to save as many of those city jobs as they can. And essentially they told us to think about it as every $100,000 or so in the budget equals a job. So if something costs 45 or 4.5 million dollars, like the UMCR expansion, that's the equivalent of 45 jobs. So this is just the realities of things. Currently, from the way they talked about things on Thursday at the budget hearings, it didn't sound like the majority of the budget committee was for the idea of expanding right now. They love the UMCR program, they want to see it grow, but because we're in such a deficit and we're already cutting so many jobs, they aren't really looking at expanding any programs this year or creating new jobs, new services, until they find the money to save jobs. But there is an argument that UMCR actually saves us money because we pay out very large liabilities for sort of police overreach. We also pay out, also The UMCR actually, if they answer the same call for the same amount of time as a police officer, it costs $35, whereas it costs $85 for that police officer to spend that same amount of time, average time on a call. So like there is cost savings in UMCR, which is an argument being made for expanding it despite the budget deficit. But we're not. It doesn't really seem like that's necessarily going to happen. Um, so just so everyone knows, we're still in budget season. There are some important dates coming up. May 16th, which is this week, I believe it's Thursday or Friday, is budget rack up day, which is basically the committee takes all their proposals, they take everything and they start to put together the budget and actually like vote on what's going to be in their budget that they're going to send from the budget committee to the full city council. And then May 21st is the first day the full city council is going to consider the budget and they're going to hear our public comment. So that's a really important day if you want to go make your thoughts on the budget known to the city. Then May 22nd, the budget is going to start being considered in the city. They're going to vote up and down different proposals and amendments and things, and they have to pass it by May 27th. So, with all that being said, we're coming to a point in our advocacy where we kind of need to decide what to do next regarding UMCR. And we're going to present a few options to you. These are also going to be available in a survey that we're going to put in the chat, I believe. But just so you know, when you get that survey, there's parts of it that are going to relate to the second half of this meeting tonight. So you might want to hold on and answer that till the end of the discussion today. But we're going to be talking about three sort of options, and it doesn't have to be one of these options. So maybe we find a fourth way to go. But option one is we continue to push hard for expansion. So we use public comment on 521. We use the time between now and the end of the budget season to continue to push for $4.5 million. And we research what things they could cut or other things they could do to find that $4.5 million. So that's option one. Like, stay the course. We want expansion. We want this program. It's really important to us. We know the budget reality is rough, but we want this anyway. Option two, we understand that the main goal of council is to find savings to get these jobs going. So we look for the alternative cuts. We advocate for alternative cuts. Some things that have been thrown out there are like reducing the size of police classes, because they often don't get in as many recruits as they have class spaces for them. So like you could reduce the size of incoming police classes. You could not buy 2 new helicopters, which frees up money for other departments to buy their equipment, which then frees up money in those departments for other jobs and stuff like that. So in option two, we wouldn't specifically be asking for expansion, but we'd be pushing for other cuts and things to help the city achieve its goals of finding these jobs, which then may also free up some money for expansion. And then option three, we essentially say, hey, we did good this year. We got our 9.4 million. We kept the program alive. We understand it's a rough year. We're not going to push for more money right now, but we're going to look for future opportunities over the course of the year. There are like things every quarter called financial status reviews or reports where they go, hey, we found some extra money, so maybe we could push at those points for expansion. But essentially, we understand city council and our allies are in a rough spot, and we kind of take our feet off the gas for a little bit. So those are sort of the three options we're talking about here. And I believe at this point, Godfrey, we wanted to open it up to see if anybody had questions or there was any discussion people wanted to have about this before they just go in and start doing the survey.
And just to make sure folks know what's coming, the other proposal that has been proposed at council LA City during these budget conversations with the Department of Community Safety, I believe, Satya is going to go over that portion of things, next. And so any sort of Q&A right now would have to be around like, clarifying option 1, 2, or 3, just to make sure before we move on from this moment. There's also lobby time in case anybody wants to lobby for option 1, 2, or 3 before we move on.
So
Sorry, is this where we say
any...
which one we want to vote?
I'm sorry, what was
Is
that?
the voting is going to happen by survey. So the survey that's been put in the chat box. But this is for any clarifying questions so that you feel like you know how you want to vote. Any clarifying questions or to lobby others for how you might vote and why. Emily?
So I'm really grateful for this group because it's one of the very few groups that I can find that advocates for unarmed crisis response. I actually reside in the San Gabriel Valley, and SGV Cares used to be the unarmed crisis response that is supposed to be catering to the San Gabriel Valley, but I was told by the director of at the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments that this program is on pause. And so I think the San Gabriel Valley relies on LA County Department of Health's own system of unarmed crisis response to respond to these mental health crises. And actually, LA County Department of Health is defining the definition of a mental health crisis right now. And we're going to have a meeting with someone with LA County Departmental Health to have a conversation with someone. So I just wanted to share that with you all briefly, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing, LA Forward, Godfrey, and Jason. So thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And actually, like that, what you just said, I think really pertains to the second half of the conversation. So definitely like hold on to what Emily said for the second half as we define like things like community safety, crisis response, etc. There's a question from Mike in the chat box as well, and others should also answer that. I know that I support our unarmed crisis response working group, but the working group leads itself. Jillian?
I don't know if this question was brought up, but so we saw the 35 an hour versus the 85 an hour for like LAPD. Do we know on average how long, like how many hours in a year LAPD spends responding to mental health crises calls and to calls for unhoused people? So we could actually give them like a breakdown of how much the savings would be.
How would folks like to answer that? I know I'm not, I won't be the only expert here. So if there's two questions on the table, Jillian's and Mike's. Who would like to answer either?
So, Jillian, you were saying, is there a calculation for what the savings might be?
Yeah, we know what the hourly savings would be, but what is the annual savings? Like how many hours is LAPD spending on going on these 6 different call types that they don't want to answer?
Yeah, so it's tough because like we know how many calls are diverted roughly a month to UMCR. And we know like that on average they spend a half hour there, and that half hour costs $35 as opposed to the 85 for UMCR. So it's about a $50 difference, and they're responding to about 1,000 calls a month. So I guess you could like say roughly we're saving the program's saving like $50,000 a month. I suppose you could calculate.
Because I think that's really powerful if we can come up with like it's not going to be exact obviously, but like some sort of estimate on how much it would save annually.
Yeah, and then there's also the idea of the liabilities. Like Eunice was pointing out, just one of the liability payouts we did last year that could have potentially been resolved differently with UMCR cost the city $14 million. So, you know, like we're trying to look into that. Actually, one of our volunteers put together like a chart all about the liabilities and how much they're costing earlier today. I haven't had a chance to look over it all yet, but like we're trying to get in there and find those numbers and research that. But it's a lot of this, since a lot of this is hypothetical, it's hard to know like exactly how much it would be saving. But we're doing our best to try to find those numbers.
But it would be
I
really
have-
cool to be able to be like, so we're guesstimating, like, let's just say that 14 million liability payment. And then we took that nearly 500, it would be like about 600,000 a year um for that other estimate, if we take the 50,000 a month.
Yeah.
And we took that and we're saying, look, you're going to save about 10.5 million to 14.5 million, just kind of give or taking. So it really pays for itself.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're trying to really find those numbers and lock that down. And then to answer Mike's question, yeah, option two. Sorry if I was a little unclear, Mike. Basically, like Eunice's and her people told us like it'd be helpful if you pushed for some of these cuts we're looking for more than pushing for expenses. So the idea would be to like use our space, use the LA Forward space to advocate for some of the cuts Eunice's is looking for, like the helicopters, like the police class size stuff, and then maybe at some point in that conversation we can say, hey, we've saved X amount of money, it'd be nice to use some of that on UMCR, but our main focus, our main goal wouldn't be the UMCR expansion. Does that, hopefully that helps clear it up a little bit, Mike? But let's see, I see one other hand up for Danielle.
Oh, actually, I was what I was going to say was following up on what you were saying, Jason, in answer to Jillian's question, which is that as far as those numbers go, I know Jason said, we're trying to find those numbers, but also, the Harvard Governance Lab is the institution doing the evaluation, and they're having, I just know this, a difficult time getting some of that information from PD, right? PD is very, we don't want to mind. This is my take on, I don't want to say that this is anyone associated with Harvard Governance Labs, but from what I've heard from someone that we know who is working on a different aspect of the evaluation, they never want to share info. I mean, that's my personal experience. And also just, that's what I've heard. So I think there are people to answer your question. The evaluation is like working on quantifying it. And because they're seeing, I think, at least a somewhat of a third party, I'm hopeful that they'll get more information where we can quantify it better. But I mean, it sounds like even from that outsider perspective, PD isn't being as helpful as it could be with their data. So just a little more
I think-
context there.
The other opportunity for data is we know what the 6 police call types are that are taken away from PD in the 6 divisions that are being served by UMCR. And that means there are 15 divisions not served by UMCR. And you could ask for the number of 6 police call types that are being addressed through police departments in those other 15, and that number of calls is the number served by an untrained individual or an untrained team that is not equipped to be able to support those particular calls. So there's just many ways we can begin to add this up. Amiko, was there another question? I know your hand was up, and then.
Oh, sorry, it was
part.
answered. I
Yeah.
basically had a similar question to Mike, so yeah, thanks.
Cool. So
Cool.
at this
Jason?
point, I'm going to pass it over to Thier to talk about our second topic tonight, and then we should hopefully have more time at the end to answer more questions and have more discussion. To Thier, do you need me to share the PowerPoint, or are you going to do it?
I can do it.
Cool.
Just a second. Just let me know if you all are able to see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Tithir. I'm also a volunteer with Ellie Forward, sorry for not being on camera. My internet is being weird. But I am going to walk us through the community safety, the proposed Department of Community Safety portion of tonight's space. As we're considering and debating between these different options, whether we advocate for increased funding for UMCR right at this time or hold off for a later, more strategic time, we thought it was important to zoom out and position UMCR within the broader conversations that are happening around the city's approach to community safety. So right now, some of the programs that we spoke about today, UMCR, Circle, and others, have largely been operating in silos. They're often housed under different departments, different committees are responsible for overseeing the different programs. And each initiative really does offer vital services, but there's a lack of coordination, which inherently means that we're risking duplication, underfunding some programs, overfunding others, ultimately missing opportunities to deliver a very holistic, cost-effective approach to public safety. And it's really that understanding that we need an integrated framework that's led to these bubbling conversations around a Department of Community Safety. The conversation is in its earliest stages, so nothing that we're sharing here is set in stone, but from our understanding as an advocacy group, in its developmental stages, this new Department of Community Safety would have 4 key pillars. Essentially, they would involve prevention, programs, initiatives to address causes before harm is occurring, intervention, engaging individuals who are at high risk in real time, unarmed crisis response, which Jason explained the model behind, and also support for survivors, ensuring that we're incorporating healing, long-term stability for those who are impacted by violence into our programming. The conversation around this new department isn't necessarily new. There have been several key milestones that have led to this conversation today being codified and something that's being discussed in this space. When Councilmember Harris Dawson became president, he had announced the creation of a new ad hoc committee on unarmed crisis prevention and intervention. A lot of us here at LA Forward in this group on the call today did attend one of that committee's meetings in March. Councilmember Hernandez, who serves on that committee, has been a consistent advocate for integrating unarmed crisis response teams into the city's broader public safety strategy. However, up until recently, there was no formal move by the committee to memorialize or frame this work rather as being the work of a new Department of Community Safety, dedicating new permanent infrastructure to this vision. And that changed recently when the mayor's budget dropped. A lot of you may already know this, but the mayor's budget did recommend consolidating several key departments, including the Department of Aging and Disability, Youth Development, Economic and Workforce Development, all under a new department. I think it's, I'm forgetting the name, but it's the new Department of Investing in Families. And that triggered the council asking or requesting the CEO to explore the feasibility of establishing a new Department of Community Safety, one that could integrate programs like UMCR into a more unified, accountable framework. This report that would examine the feasibility of such a new department should be coming out this Friday, May 16th, also known as RAC Day, and it can really help shape the direction and timing of our advocacy. So that's just to give everyone an overview of the conversations that have happened up until this point. We do want to share that our understanding is that several, for CD1 at least, requesting this feasibility memo is also a strategic motion or a strategic move to buy some critical time. The Budget and Finance Committee would leverage this request and the information that comes back about the feasibility of a community safety department to push for an extra 60 days to give everyone the time to do due diligence in understanding processes within and across departments, understanding what consolidating departments could actually mean, and fostering the cross-committee collaboration that would be needed to ensure efficiency. The primary objective of this 60-day extension, however, is to make sure that no layoffs take effect before essentially January. It gives more time before a lot of the city jobs that are under threat with the budget would actually have to transition out. It also means that the ad hoc committee would have until September 30th to produce a report with final recommendations on what a fully integrated Department of Community Safety could and should look like. Since their deadline would be September 30th, and we won't know for sure until we have these additional 60 days until July, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to wait until then to begin this work. If the extension is granted and the ad hoc committee is expected to submit a final report by September 30th, that means for us, we really only have the summer to align across different stakeholders, across different programs on what we would want this new Department of Community Safety to really look like. So there's several key questions that we wanted to open for discussion to the group, understanding what outcomes we would want to see from the Department of Community Safety, what it should and should not be, using that larger vision, that larger mission to guide conversation around what does that mean? What does that mean for the infrastructure of the department? What other departments, what sort of staff, what sort of programs should be housed under this new department? And how are we going to make sure that in both the conversations leading up to this department and in the actual implementation and programming of the department, it's responsive, it remains continuously responsive to community feedback. So that's really to lay the framework for the conversation we'd like to have with everyone. I'll pass it back to Godfrey in case you wanted to add something, Godfrey.
No, but just to underline some of the headlines that Sathir just offered us. A Department of Community Safety has been thrown into conversation. It is not intended, it sounds like, to be landing definition by May 21st or 22nd next week. It sounds like it is just introduced in this process because it seemed like other departments were shifting form in this process, so why not? Was kind of the question, which now gives us the opportunity to influence all of the questions that Sathir introduced on the screen and elsewhere. And so I put into the chat box a link to a survey that asks you for your thought around the UMCR options, like should we move ahead with advocacy for expansion? Should we advocate for other shifts in the budget, or should we just hold off for now? And then the second part of the survey is about what Sathir introduced, about like what would a Department of Community Safety